ride.
Want a lift?
Hey! Okay, dude, let's see what that jalopy can do!
What's a jalopy?
First off the line.
Yeah, I'm sure they're feeling pretty silly right now.
Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Megas Month. So, this episode, Coop de Tat, is first and foremost a pun, but this episode, Coop de Tat is it's, at least, I don't know how it's pronounced, but basically the episode is about, it's about a society of robots who get pissed off at Coop for breaking a sacred relic of theirs, and they immediately try to kind of, capture him in order to become and kind of do a whole bunch of other things in order to kind of become emperor of the new empire, because that's what's been established at the start of the episode. So it does open up on what is referred to as the Halcyon Worlds, which are these which is this massive empire that is seemingly an entire society of robots that are also a medieval ageist thing, and it's very, very confusing, but also very fun, but also kind of interesting as well. It's like you kind of wonder like how this society actually came to be, but in case the leader of the Halcyon Empire, the Halcyon Emperor, he's decided that he no longer wants to be emperor and has decided to declare a successor. And in order to do that, his meritocratic society has decided to actually host a tournament to replace him, and they are currently on the very last leg of that. They're on the very last leg of to actually replace the empire, and of course one of the robots, one of the Halcyon Knights, as they're referred to in the script. One of the Halcyon Knights, Zanzor, declares that he's more than happy to finish the final task, while his rival Gaivan, who is also featured, is he doesn't want Zanzor to be emperor, and is very particular and also butts in to try and offer up his service as to the empire. But of course the empire breaks them both off and declares that their task that they need to complete in order to actually become emperor is a simple one, and then gestures to a large dais in the center of the room that has a large flame stick burning in the middle of it, and what the Halcyon Emperor declares is that it is actually their most sacred relic, the Flame of Azeroth, and declares that whoever brings the Flame of Azeroth to all corners of their world, and will in all corners of their glorious empire, will indeed become the new emperor. And of course Zanzor and Gaivan and everybody else then prepares to actually go in and actually get ready to prepare the sacred flame to actually be transported, until Magus suddenly appears out of nowhere and lands on top of it. And of course, what we and this obviously winds up putting the Flame of Azeroth out. But of course, what we find out is that Coop didn't mean to do that. And as every time he accidentally does something, he didn't mean to put out the Flame of Azeroth. As we find out, Coop was trying to find his way to a monster truck rally, and what happened was, he actually pressed a random button that he didn't fully know what did, and as it turns out, Megas has a warp drive that Coop apparently wasn't aware about, and because he's just randomly pressing buttons, he just kind of warps all over the place. And case in point, he just kind of warped into the Halcyon World's main throne room, smashed their most precious relic, and then warped back out without anybody fully understanding what was going on. And of course, the Emperor immediately flies into a rage about the fact that their most sacred relic has been destroyed, and then decides that since their original task can no longer be completed, he decides to actually give the rest of the Halcyon Knights a new task, which is to find Magus and bring him back to their world to basically pay for his crimes. So and of course the Halcyon Knights immediately decide go off and go do that and go to continue their quest. So and of course, it then cuts to Magus, who has since warped into the middle of space, and Kiva's trying to figure out what exactly it is that Coop has done, and Coop points out that he is just kind of he's just kind of been pressing buttons, and of course Kiva then points out that Coop must have accidentally set off the trans-dimensional warp drive that Magus has installed in it, and of course Coop has no idea what that is, but didn't even know that he had one, and of course Kiva even points out that she didn't even know it was working in the first place, because Coop didn't know what it was and didn't tell her because he didn't know what it was, but does point out that he does need to kind of figure it out in a hurry, because they're currently missing the monster truck rally, and what we find out is that there's this giant robotic creature thing called what is it, the I think it's like a pun, like the carnivore or something, but basically it's this giant, but basically we do see it briefly, it's this giant robot T-Rex that chews up and smashes things, and the lore behind this mechanical creature that the monster truck rally created is that it eats cars to gain power. That's basically what it is. But of course, Coop then declares that they need to actually figure out this warp drive. But Kiva warns him that they shouldn't just start randomly pressing buttons, because that could very easily burn out the warp drive. But of course, Coop is already doing that by the time she actually gets around to warning him, and then starts flashing through various different environments in an effort to actually find the monster truck rally. And it is very comical in that we see a couple of environments, both new and old. And at one point, he actually warps the Gentle Beast planet from last episode, which is very funny. But yeah, he's just warping to and from, and does eventually wind up finding the monster truck rally briefly, but winds up getting warped out of it before he can actually fully see any of the action, and becomes very, very particularly annoyed at that. And at which point he actually winds up burning out the warp drive, as Kiva said, and Kiva realizes that she's going to need to fix it, and asks it to hand it to her. And what we find out is that Coop, because he didn't know what it was, he started using it as a change drawer, which, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, obviously, in between All I Wanted Was a Slushie and this one, he obviously him scrounging through the cushions for change wasn't going to cut it, so he started using something that he didn't know what did as a change drawer. And it makes perfect sense for Coop to do that. He's the kind of guy who likes his things organized, and of course he's going to use something that he doesn't know what it is as a change drawer, because that's the kind of guy he is. He doesn't fully understand what half of the things that Megas do, so of course he's not going to fully understand that, hey, this important thing that enables Megas to warp all over the place isn't a change drawer, it's a warp drive. And of course he immediately Coop, once Coop realizes what he is, and he immediately takes it out and hands it to Kiva so she can fix it, and dumps out all the change in it, and as Kiva's fixing it, she then proceeds to mention that it is a very important piece of equipment that would enable them to go anywhere and do anything at a moment's notice, which would indeed very much help them in their fight against the Glorf and a bunch of other things. But it's at this point where Jamie realizes that when she says anything, she means literally anything, and starts fantasizing all the places he can warp into and out of using Magus' warp drive. And sure enough, we see him robbing banks, stealing candy from kids, and warping himself into a cheerleader's locker room, and he starts kind of fantasizing about all of that, and it's very obvious he has a very goofy expression on his face, and of course Kiva and Coop just kind of stare at him, and that's not the first time they do that either. It becomes a recurring gag throughout this episode where Jamie's less than savory actions are become under scrutiny of the group, who just kind of see him fantasizing about things. And then kind of realize that he's off in his own little world, and it's funny. I think this is like the first time they've actually reacted to his fantasies. It's funny, but in case as Kiva is actually fixing up the warp drive, they're suddenly attacked by Zenzor, who shows up with a mace fist, and Coop eventually turns around, realizing that when he finds out somebody is attacking him, and of course this actually winds up knocking Jamie out of his fantasy a little bit, because obviously Coop is being attacked, and Coop turns around wondering who the hell is messing up his paint job, and of course Zenzor then declares that he's going to bring Coop back to his home to pay for his crimes, and of course he has no idea what exactly it is that he's actually talking about, and but all he knows is that this guy is actually scratching up his paint with his mace, and decides to follow up with a mace fist of his own, which Zenzor then attacks, then grabs onto, and starts and starts beating him up like a yo-yo, just pulling him in, attacking him, and putting him back out and pulling him back in. And at one point, Jamie even points out that they should probably go home and get the hell out of there. But Coop points out that he's not going to back down, and proceeds to wrench his hand free from Zanzor's grasp and proceeds to land a punch. But Zanzor is still very much not having any of it and proceeds to get ready to go in and fight Magus. But then Gaivan actually shows up and breaks up the fight between Zanzor and Magus, and of course because he thinks that they're on the same side, Coop immediately thanks Gaivan for the assist. But then Gaivan reveals that he's actually that the only reason he saved Coop is so that he can take him in himself, and then tells Coop that he can either come quietly or not, or go down swinging. And of course this causes Coop to become confused, but points out that he doesn't do things quietly, as he puts it, and gets ready to go and fight Gaivan. But then he and Zanzor wind up fighting amongst themselves instead of actually fighting Magus, and this causes the trio to actually become confused because they have no idea why the trio are fighting. And of course we know why they're fighting. It's because they both want to be emperor, but Coop doesn't know that yet. So he doesn't fully understand that they're actually fighting amongst themselves because they both want to capture Coop so that they can become emperor. And of course, Coop wonders whether or not they should ask them why they're fighting. But then Jamie points out that might not be an option, and then adjusts the rearview mirror to discover that a lot more robots are actually showing up to actually fight them. And of course Coop. It's at this point where Jamie suggests that they actually leave, where they actually still have an opportunity to leave. But Coop just kind of points out that he handles it, even though Kiva quickly points out that he doesn't. And sure enough, every single one of the robots actually starts firing missiles, even though Coop does put up a bit of a valiant effort by actually shooting them all down as they get close. And eventually Kiva realizes that they're going to need to employ some evasive maneuvers, and discovers a nearby nebula that they can hide in that should mask their electromagnetic frequencies and also scramble the targeting systems of the other robots so they can't actually find them. And while Coop doesn't fully understand what she's talking about right away because she starts using coordinates and a whole bunch of other things that Coop doesn't understand, he does eventually realize that that's actually a good idea and doesn't actually fly in. And the missiles wind up kind of blowing themselves up because they can't find Coop anymore. And of course Kiva declares that they should be safe inside the nebula and hopes that the other robots will figure that out as well. But of course Jamie points out that it doesn't seem that way because he actually notices that their other robots have actually flown in after them. But what we quickly find out is that they can't actually tell who is who in there. And sure enough, this is demonstrated by Zanzor attacking a robot that he initially thinks is Magus because they have the same exact body shape. And even after discovering that it isn't actually Magus, he attacks him anyway because it's one less rival for him when he becomes emperor. But of course, the Kiva quickly realizes that they can't tell who's who, and Coop decides to actually use this to advantage by rather comically taking them all out one by one, by silently sneaking up on them with Magus, destroying the robot, and then proceeding to retreat back into the nebula and just doing a bunch of hit and run tactics. And this causes the various Halcyon Knights to become admittedly a little scared of their immediate surroundings because, of course, there's just this big thing like just appearing and disappearing like a phantom and destroying all of their friends. So of course, a couple of them wind up shaking in their boots when they just see their friend disappear into the darkness, and then a body part comes floating back. It's honestly a little gruesome, and if it weren't robots, it probably wouldn't have gotten on network television. But yeah, of course, eventually Coop manages to defeat most of the robots this way, and eventually escapes the nebula, declaring that takes care of that. But then they're actually stopped by Gaivan, who declares that he's not going to let them off so easily, and once again states that if they come along quietly, they can either leave in pieces or dead or alive, and either way they're going to come back to pay for their crimes. And but Coop declares that he's not going to go down easily, and it's at this point where Gaivan actually winds up launching a missile, which Coop manages to dodge. until it's revealed that it wasn't actually a missile. As it turns out, this missile actually reveals to have a grappling hook on the end of it, and proceeds to grab the back of Magus, which causes all of Magus' systems to shut down. And Coop, of course, very angrily asks Gaivan what exactly it was he shot him with, and Gaivan declares that it was actually a missile designed to actually disable all Magus' systems, thereby leaving it helpless and enabling him to actually bring Magus back without any real hassle. And of course, now declaring that he's finally obtained his prize, he goes into actually going to capture Magus, only for Zanzor to show up out of nowhere and take Magus back for himself. And of course, this actually causes Gaivan to become very angry with Zanzor, pointing out that he was the one who captured Magus. He should be the one to bring him back. But of course, Zanzor declares that the rule is that they bring him back to the Emperor, not necessarily who captured him, but who brought him back. And of course, this becomes Gaivan to actually get very annoyed with Zanzor, and then proceeds to head him off, and the two start fighting amongst themselves. And then several of the other robots also start fighting amongst themselves as well, trying to capture Magus and failing. And Coop can only really just sit there and watch because he can't move, as all the robots just start fighting amongst themselves in an effort to try and capture Magus. And eventually Zanzor does succeed in actually winning the fight and winds up capturing Magus for himself, and is eventually the one to actually bring him back to the Emperor. So of course, this winds up with Magus being strung up to one of the archways, and it's at this point where the Emperor declares that Zanzor is indeed his successor, pointing out that among the many soldiers he sent, Zanzor alone was the one who actually succeeded in capturing Magus. And of course, we know that's not true, and Gaivan even knows that's not true, and is actually shooting daggers at Zanzor throughout the entire crowning process where he's declared Emperor. And of course, it's during this point where the Emperor declares that now that the interloper, as he puts it, has been captured, he can now face judgment at the hands of the Metal Maiden. And Jamie points out that doesn't sound so bad, and starts fantasizing an actual metal rock band with an all-female metal rock band, which of course Kiva once again stares at him for, and can actually see, and there's like a very funny little audio gag where he's shown hearing, where it seems like they're actually hearing the music play around in his head, and that's really funny. But of course, it's at this point where the Emperor actually winds up picking up his sword, which is revealed to be a chainsaw for some reason. It's not entirely clear why, but of course he then proceeds to crown Zanzor Emperor and hands him the sword. And then, at which point Zanzor declares that Metal Maiden will actually be used to actually pass judgment onto Magus for all of the crimes it's committed. And it's at this point where Jamie finally realizes that Metal Maiden is actually the sword itself. And then panics a little bit and tells Coop to get them out of there. But also points out that they can't actually get out of there until they deal with their jammed weapons. And wonders if Kiva has actually figured out anything. And Kiva points out that she hasn't really. She's pointed out that it says that taking it down will actually blow it up and take Magus with it. And does also point out that she can't actually crack the code because as she points out, it's very complex and she's having a hard time figuring it out. At which point Coop points out that if it is indeed unbreakable, then he'll just have to find a way to actually do it himself, and then proceeds to grab his wrench from the glove compartment, which Kiva points out is probably a bad idea, pointing out that they're going to need a deft, gentle touch. But of course, Coop doesn't do that. He walks outside of Magus' head, goes up to the missile that's latched on the back of Magus, and just starts beating it with his wrench, which eventually just causes it to fall off, all without exploding, mind you, and then gets back into Magus' compartment, get back into Magus' head, and then kind of takes a minute to gloat, pointing out that he guesses it wasn't so unbreakable after all. But in case, it's at this point where Zanzor then declares that he's now going to kill Coop because of course Coop caused a lot of problems for them and needs to pay for his crimes. But it's at this point where Kiva finally finishes the warp drive and hands it back to Coop, and Coop declares that now that the warp drive's fixed, they're getting the hell out of there. and proceeds to press the button on the warp drive, much to Kiva's chagrin, because as we find out, the warp drive has to actually be connected to Magus first to actually warp it around the place, and Coop didn't really know this at first, so he just presses the button, and this actually causes the warp drive to just kind of disappear. And as Kiva explains, it's now going on a warp tour through the entirety of space, and declares that they will most likely never actually find it. So and of course, Coop points out that since that didn't work, he's going to have to go with Plan B, and then proceeds to free Magus from its bonds because it's currently been strung up from the arch, and then proceeds to actually declare his signature trash talk, which I should mention is funny for the fact that all of the things that Coop complains about for it in his trash talk is none of the aliens' fault. As he keeps interrupting, he points out all of the things that have gone wrong about how he missed his truck rally, he lost his perfectly good warp drive, and he got attacked for no reason. All of which Jamie and Kiva chime in was all Coop's fault. And Coop eventually just loses his train of thought and just starts throwing punches. So and of course, Zanzor declares that he cannot be defeated, but is immediately defeated after that because now Coop is very much able to actually fight back against him, and he's defeated almost immediately and slain in half. And this causes Gaivan to realize that now that the Emperor has been slain, that means that whoever avenges the Emperor will become the new Emperor. And then proceeds to go in and try and shoot Magus with a missile, which misses, and he winds up hitting the former Emperor instead, which of course causes all the robots to declare that he will pay for his crimes. But of course, Magus then points out that Magus didn't have anything to do with that. It was all Gaivan's fault, and of course this causes all of them to start fighting against each other, and eventually Coop then does wind up picking up the sword, and then starts fighting with it, and starts fighting back against it, which causes him to start. Actually, of course, he starts using the sword to just kind of start destroying robots. But eventually, Gaivan does wind up getting the upper hand on him, and eventually manages to take the sword away from him, and is about to cut Magus open. But Coop, in a very fourth wall joke, I should mention, presses a button at the very last 5 minutes of the episode. Presses a button labeled the last 5 minutes of the episode, and sets Magus' hands on fire. And with his newfound flame hands, he's then able to actually successfully start fighting back against the other robots. And also in the process melts the metal maiden, which causes it to now be just a worthless piece of metal. But the former Emperor, seeing all of this, he quickly realizes that that surprisingly enough, it's very eerily similar to one of their prophecies that they have hanging on the wall, and stops the fighting himself, and then declares that Magus is in fact the chosen one, as he puts it, and then declares Magus the new Emperor, pointing out that the Sacred Flame of Azeroth has seemingly chosen him. Because Coop accidentally set Magus' hands on fire and can't put them out. So, and of course, this winds up being a very funny thing where Coop doesn't fully understand what's going on because, of course, he's not qualified to be an Emperor, like, at all. Whereas Jamie, of course, is fully happy with that and starts fantasizing about the fact that he is an Emperor now. And it winds up becoming this music video thing where he winds up coming in with some girls from Metal Maiden, or at least the fictional band that he thinks is Metal Maiden. And Coop then comes down on a rope with his hair all thinning, and he's wearing a security outfit, and Coop declares him the Duke, the Emperor, and this causes Jamie to start cheering for himself, which Coop and Kiva can't help but laugh at him for. But upon realizing that Coop is indeed the Emperor now of the Halcyon Empire, he then realizes that he probably should make a speech. And then makes a speech about how he's very thankful for his newfound subjects' love and appreciation of him, and decides to actually repay the favor by just restoring their sacred flame of Azeroth. And he then proceeds to do exactly that. He does that with the best of intentions. He walks up to the dais and sets it back on fire again. But this actually winds up being a lot harder than the dais can handle, and starts spraying the flames all throughout the Empire. And of course, Coop quickly realizes that he needs to put it out and tries to figure out what to do. But because Magus' hands are still on fire, he just starts making things worse. And eventually he gets out of Magus to ask the Halcyon Knights if they indeed have any water that he can use to put the fire out, which causes Gaivan to declare that their new emperor is actually infested with humanoids, or as he puts them, insects, and declares that they're going to have to destroy the emperor to help purge him of his insects. And of course this causes Coop to finally realize that they probably should get the hell out of there, and proceeds to get back into Magus and flies off. And Kiva then points out that they just burned an entire empire to the ground, but Coop points out that it'll probably be fine and it was only a little fire. But then as he flies away, we quickly discover that no, it wasn't a little fire. In fact, it spread very far and caused the entire planet to go up and then explode. So yeah, it wasn't a little tiny flame at all. But and there isn't, and I should mention, there isn't an end credits gag for this one. It's just Jamie once again fantasizing about the fact that he was emperor for all of about 5 seconds. And of course he even mentions that at the end of the episode about how he was emperor, and that chicks actually dig that. But of course there's really no end episode gag. There isn't one for this one. It's just an extension of Jamie's fantasy from earlier in the episode. That's all that happened here. But in case, yeah, this episode is interesting in that it's actually has a couple of references. So first and foremost, the various Halcyon Knights are actually based on Transformers and what is it? The Magnature Z. And it's based on various robots from those two franchises specifically. In fact, I think the Emperor is based on a character from Transformers. Actually, I think the Emperor is very much based on a character from Transformers. But yeah, this episode is fun, and that's and then Magus is kind of just Coop just kind of pisses off an entire society of medieval alien robots, which is really funny. But in the process, they all start fighting amongst themselves to try and defeat Magus. And I think that's one of the few times where the villains have actually fought amongst themselves rather than each other, because of course all of the robots are just kind of they don't really care about each other. They're just trying to become emperor, and Magus just happens to be a common threat for all of them. So yeah, they all have their own ulterior motives, and I do kind of like that. I do kind of like how the villains are just fighting amongst each other. But in case, yeah, that is my review of Megas XLR. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the links in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video, but it may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom link is actually my original playlist for Courage Month. If you guys absolutely want to go see that, by all means, go check that out. Link is on the end screen. I put a lot of love and work into that one. That one's still getting a lot of views, and I would very much like it if you guys want to go check out the original one of these that I did. I do like doing these. I would like to make more of these, and I hope you guys will continue to support me in the near future as I continue to make more of these. But in case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!